Hey guys, so this is Team Seaweed. We've got Alexis, Jake, Marcelo, Shalini, and me. Alexis, Shalini, and Alexis, Jake, and I will present. So we'll just quickly give you an overview first, a bit of background about seaweed. So we all know that seaweed has fabulous potential as a sequestration and an ecosystem service solution. Uh, I think I'll just highlight one key point on the slide, which is the high primary production. So essentially, that means that it can remove carbon dioxide at a rate that rivals tropical rainforests and swamps, which are said to have very high sequestration. So that just gives us a sense of the amount of potential the solution has if we move away from farming just on the land to the ocean. But what does that mean for us? So what that really means is if we are moving away from centuries of farming on land to farming on the ocean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So a lot of challenges. The first thing is finding application. So what would we do with all that seaweed? Eat it, animal feed, sink to sequester, extract ingredients. So those are things that we could do in terms of applications. Once we farm more than millions millions of square kilometers of it. But what are the challenges with doing that? So there's challenges in terms of permit issues. For example, North America, in fact, most rich geographies, there's huge issues in terms of permits currently. So there's multi-use, right? So most coastal areas are multi-use. But offshore wind farms, that's a leap really that we need to take into the open ocean. Uh, in terms of cost as well, very high cost compared to Asia, where it's been growing for a long time. And finally, environmental impacts. So how did we sort of look at this? We looked at the applications in terms of where could this be used to grow demand of this fabulous solution. So we looked at food, bioplastics, a bit of bioremediation, and but then we focused mainly on cattle feed additive. And we feel that this is a solution, or we think that this is a solution which represents a gigaton opportunity with both dairy and beef farming still scaling up as to meet demand in developing countries. And also the fact that livestock farmers are being confronted with the fact that plant-based solutions are so effective and diverting away from their products. So they need to come up with ways. So we felt this was the right focus. With that, I'll hand over to Alexis.
Great, thanks. So we have a lot here, and I'm just going to touch on the highlights. So we chose cattle feed as our opportunity primarily because methane is a key and often overlooked greenhouse gas, and also because of the immense co-benefits. So there's 1.5 billion cattle on the planet, and unfortunately, global animal protein consumption is expected to continue growing. So livestock are a huge contributor to GHG emissions. Methane traps more heat than CO2, and reducing methane will be critical to lowering overall GHG emissions. So a seaweed solution could work for beef and dairy cattle and other ruminants as well, such as sheep and goats. Achieving the methane reductions that we've seen in studies with seaweed additives could help us meet Paris Agreement targets and buy us more time to deal with other gases like CO2. California already has a law on the books to reduce methane by 40% by 2030, and we expect this regulatory environment to keep evolving and improving. Next. Importantly, it's technically feasible and price competitive. So the additive would account for a small percentage of the overall animal feed and has a potential to improve the productivity of the animal, making it attractive to farmers. Also, there's great potential for job creation, particularly in coastal and indigenous communities. And additionally, demand for this product would support seaweed cultivation and afforestation, which also have numerous environmental benefits. Next slide. To determine demand sizing, we looked at the overall feed market, the additives market, the methane credits market, and the organic meat and dairy markets. Next. So animal feed is a huge industry valued at $74.8 billion US dollars in 2019 and is expected to grow 3.2% annually over the next few years. Next. The additive market was $37.83 billion US dollars and is also expected to grow. Next. Asia Pacific emerged as the largest regional market with a volume share of 37%, with China as the largest producer and consumer of meat in the world. North America accounted for 21% of the total market share. So we gathered information about some of the biggest players in both the feed and additives markets. And as you'll see on the next slide, we also took a snapshot of the regional outlook, highlighting countries with the most additives use. You can go ahead, Varun, thanks. So while we were looking at consumer and client segments, we decided to target the influencers of buying decisions. So if top meat and dairy buyers demand climate friendly, this could certainly influence the farmers. So we examined the various segments of the cattle business and found options for seaweed supplements across multiple of these segments. For example, using the supplement in both a grow yard and in a finishing yard. Next. So in terms of potential products, we looked at a seaweed extract feed additive. We looked at a greenhouse gas or methane offset business model similar to the carbon credits that exist today. We looked at a franchise model for seaweed cultivation, or perhaps a supply chain role, such as joining forces with an existing organic feed supplier. Next. We had some really informative stakeholder calls, and we just wanted to highlight a few of the important takeaways. So it seems that farmers are open to this as long as it is cost effective and provides additional benefits to the animals. It's going to be important to have regional seaweeds to use in order to keep costs down. More studies need to be done on bromoform, which seems to be the active ingredient. Scaling is a big issue. There's not enough seaweed right now commercially available to do this. And we also need more intermediaries to handle and process the seaweed. Perhaps a distributor model might work in this case. Thanks, and I'll pass it to Jake.
Okay, so we took a quick look at what this industry looks like right now, and it's really in an embryonic form in terms of cultivating seaweed for cattle feed. There are two basic approaches. One is either, especially in warm water, look at ways to grow this red seaweed called Asparagopsis. This is the one that's validated to inhibit the methanogens in the cow's stomach. And so people are trying that in warm water and also in labs in US and Europe and in Australia. But there's also the opportunity to cultivate cold water species wherever you happen to be in Europe or in the US, for example, Saccharina. So I just listed a few of the producers here. And as you can see, the volumes that are being produced are either low, 500 or 250 tons, or just basically nothing yet. And many of these companies are planning to come to market this year. So we'll hope to have a lot more data soon. Overall, the global total, if you include East Asian cultivation, is less than $1,000 per ton, but the only stated values we can get from Europe are close to double that. Okay, next, thank you. And briefly, there's been a burst of activity, including some funding from the EU in a program called Abacus, and from the US ARPA-E Mariner program, which has spent or invested almost $25 million in the past few years. And the goal of Mariner in particular is to reduce cultivation costs for seaweed at least tenfold and ideally 100-fold compared to current US and EU costs. So that's a big deal. The venture investment is still quite small. And one thing Varun mentioned at the outset, there's lots and lots of ocean to cultivate seaweed in, but as you move further away from the shore, the CapEx gets more considerable. So that's a big deal. So like I said, 2021, we hope to see more market entries and more data soon.
Thanks, Jake. So just a quick recap. So we've looked at seaweed, and this is the value chain really. So you've got cultivation, refinery, and commercialization. Effectively, what you're doing is you're growing seaweed, so seeding it, growing it, harvesting it, either in an automated or manual fashion, processing, which is drying, milling, fermenting, extracting components to a refinery approach, and then transforming into end product and transporting it. So there's also a lot of storage involved because this is a high mass product effectively. In addition to that, you've got the whole commercialization angle. So you've got in this particular case, you've got to work with the end users, create awareness, give them incentives. You've got the and then you've got the whole work around carbon offsets as well. And then finally, you've got a lot of work on constant work on innovation in terms of breeding, cultivation, automation, as I mentioned earlier, and also in terms of enhancing sequestration. So what we saw here is potentially an entire ecosystem space that could emerge. There's a lot of operating models here that could translate, could be operationalized across the space. And but in each of them, there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of open questions in terms of how do you make this happen. It is new for us, and really, there's license to permit on cultivation, which species, locations, yield, how do you maximize yield, and many more things that you can see over here. From a refinery perspective, where do you locate it? Because the product, the bioactives in the product are only have a certain shelf life. So how close does it need to be to the farm? Can it be floating? How do you get a steady supply of seaweed to ensure that the biorefinery is actually profitable, viable? And other questions there. Commercialization, for example, the carbon offset arrangement. So how do you actually work that? How do you have the incentives to the farmers in a way to make this happen? So just a few points there, but there's quite a few questions there. We also took some assumptions like a biorefinery plus a distribution model, and we looked at sort of running a financial model on that. And clearly the drivers on the revenue side would be things like the price, of the carbon offsets, the commercial arrangements, obviously. The cost drivers clearly are the storage, the cost of cultivation, potentially the capex and amortization costs. But there's significant opportunity here. So there's a lot of testing going on, and across the world, there's many species that now emerge as potential candidates. There's regulation that could expand geographically, and then also potentially it's much lower cost than competing methane solutions. Finally, our next step. So we do plan to move forward and finalize these open questions, and also we are very excited as a group about seaweed. So we plan to move ahead and review a bioremediation plus the sink to sequester business model. And I'll leave you the quote. That's it.